after my father's sudden death from an unexpected illness, leaving a crushing $2 million debt behind. My mother and brother, Tom, decided to handle his inheritance without consulting me. I was left to bear the financial burden, which sparked intense frustration. But a part of me couldn't help but feel an inner satisfaction, knowing they'd soon face their own struggles. At 24, I was a single woman working as a nursery teacher at a daycare center. I graduated from a junior college and had always lived with my parents and my brother, Tom, who was close to my age. Tom and I had never gotten along. A graduate of a prestigious university, Tom constantly belittled me for attending a junior college. He made frequent jabs at my modest personality and average appearance, often mocking me with your looks and lack of impressive qualifications, who would ever want you? In reality, I did have a boyfriend, but I kept it a secret, fearing Tom's mockery. Though his words used to sting, I had long since moved past them. I took great pride in my work with children, finding joy in my role as a nursery teacher. Tom's insults no longer had the power to hurt me. My mother, who worshipped Tom for his university education, would often boast about him to relatives and neighbors. Meanwhile, I was largely ignored. It was obvious she favored Tom, showering him with praise and attention. On the other hand, my father always had my back. When my mother gave snacks only to Tom, my father would secretly share the same treats with me, always encouraging my choice to be a nursery teacher. His support meant the world to me. My father was the CEO of a small company, and Tom also worked there. Unfortunately, the company had been struggling financially, despite my father's tireless efforts to cut costs, including working late into the night. Tom was indifferent to the situation. "I can't work for a company run by someone who's so incompetent," Tom remarked before quitting to pursue another job. Since marrying, my mother had stopped working to focus on household duties. She had no understanding of the challenges my father faced in running the business. Even though she saw his daily struggles, she continued to criticize him. "The company is still failing. If you don't fix the finances soon, I won't be able to buy the new bag I saw in the magazine. Honestly, what are you doing all day? You're worthless." My mother's insatiable desire for luxury goods only made matters worse. I couldn't understand why she failed to recognize my father's hard work. Though I wasn't a business expert, I understood the difficulties of managing a company from watching my father. My mother, who had been with him for years, should have seen it too. I couldn't fathom why she would blame him as if he were incapable. One day, my frustration reached its peak, and I confronted my mother, demanding that she stop belittling my father. She responded with a condescending attitude. "Why should I listen to someone like you? People without education shouldn't talk. Stay out of things you don't understand," she retorted. Tom, seemingly influenced by her attitude, joined in, harshly criticizing me. It became clear that, despite being family, our values and personalities were worlds apart. "Nancy, don't let their words get to you. Your education doesn't define you. Take pride in being a nursery teacher. That's what matters," my father said. His words gave me strength and reassurance, even though part of me wanted to confront Tom and felt overshadowed by him. My father's support made me feel invincible. As long as he was by my side, I knew I could face anything. Then, an unexpected tragedy struck. My father collapsed at work. The company staff called me in a panic, saying he was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. Without hesitation, I went straight there. But to my shock, neither my mother nor Tom had come. "I'm too busy. You'll have to deal with Dad's care," my mother told me. I was stunned. How could she claim to be too busy when my father's life was on the line? As a stay-at-home mom, surely she had more flexibility than I did. What could be more important than being with him? I handled all the hospital arrangements and heard the grim news. My father had acute heart failure and only days to live. I visited him as much as I could, hoping to see him smile one last time. A few days later, as if sensing my presence, he regained consciousness. "I'm so relieved to see you. Do you recognize me? Can you hear my voice?" I pleaded desperately, but he simply looked at me with a vacant stare before quietly closing his eyes, never to open them again. Neither my mother nor Tom visited him during his illness. They only showed up just before the funeral, clearly reluctant to deal with the arrangements. It was then I learned that my father's company had gone bankrupt, leaving behind the massive $2 million debt. Inheritances come with debts, my mother remarked coldly. As the funeral progressed, she and Tom began to criticize my father for the situation. He was useless in life, and now he's left us with this burden. What a curse, they complained. What are we supposed to do with all this debt? My mother wondered aloud. I have an idea, Tom said with a smirk, turning to face me. Since Dad always favored you, why not inherit everything? You can also handle the debt. It's only fair to repay the love he gave you, my mother added, her voice laced with cold expectation. Incredibly, my mother and Tom were trying to foist both my father's inheritance and his debts onto me. They were more concerned with their own interests than mourning his loss. They had always ridiculed both my father and me, seeing us as mere tools for their benefit. But I had a plan in place, one that my father had entrusted me with in case something happened to him. Now, it was time to put it into action. I decided to keep my true intentions hidden and pretended to agree to their demands, all the while secretly preparing to execute my plan. All right, I'll take on everything, including the debt, I said. My calm acquiescence surprised both my mother and Tom, considering I was saddled with a $2 million debt, which they probably assumed I'd fight more. But their sense of satisfaction at shifting that burden onto me seemed to outweigh any shock. Their expressions were a mix of triumph and disdain. So, you're really going to pay off all this debt? Well, I guess we should be grateful. Though, I don't quite understand why you'd choose this path. You really are quite naive. But I suppose that comes with your limited education, Tom remarked. In the end, my mother and Tom relinquished their claims to my father's estate, and with no other relatives to contest it, I became the sole beneficiary. After my father's passing, I moved out of the house I no longer wanted to be in and embarked on a new chapter of my life. It was during this time that I quietly set my plan into action. A few months after my father's death, I had an unexpected encounter. What is this? Tom, who I hadn't seen in a while, appeared, furious. His face turned crimson, and it seemed like he was ready to explode. His anger was likely stirred by seeing me stepping out of a mansion that could only be described as grand. How is it that Nancy, who supposedly inherited a mountain of debt and has such a low status, is living in a place like this? He must have wondered, and it was the question both he and my mother were about to ask. Seeing you both so stunned, what a surprise after all this time. I'm glad to see you're doing well, I responded. Who do you think you are, making jokes like that with no education? I want some answers, Tom snapped. This is where I live. Is it really so shocking to see me leaving my own house? I answered calmly. Tom's anger seemed to escalate as he stepped toward me, but as a nursery teacher used to lifting children every day, I had more strength than he expected. Tom, who avoided physical exertion, was no match for me. I easily overpowered him, and soon enough, he was on the ground, utterly stunned. My mother rushed to his side, and I smiled before explaining. The reason I'm living here is because of the decision you two made to forego Dad's inheritance. Before he passed, my father had been carefully building wealth through real estate to secure our future. Despite the company's debts, the value of the properties rose sharply. After inheriting the estate, I sold them at the right time. And even after paying inheritance taxes, I ended up with more than $5 million in profit. My father foresaw this rise in value, which is why I took on the inheritance, even with the debt. Instead of immediately using the proceeds to settle the $2 million, I ensured the employees of his company were compensated fairly. Plus, I received a $3 million life insurance payout. The amount was truly substantial. Wait a minute. Life insurance usually goes to the spouse, right? My mother interrupted. It seems Dad changed the beneficiary to me, I explained. He had told me this before his death. He was deeply troubled by your harsh words and reckless spending. He trusted me to manage the life insurance to ensure it was used wisely. I've always had a dream of helping children in need. With the funds from my father's estate and the life insurance payout, I built a home, more like a mansion, and while still working as a nursery teacher, I'm also using the real estate skills I learned from my father to grow my wealth. After explaining everything, my mother and Tom were seething with anger, shouting in outrage. This is ridiculous. Why didn't you tell us about this earlier? If we'd known about the real estate, we never would have let you inherit it, they screamed. I stood firm, replying, Dad knew exactly how you'd react, which is why he kept it a secret. I didn't think you'd prove him right, but here we are. What are you talking about? We still deserve our share of the inheritance. We're entitled to it, Tom demanded. I was taken aback by my mother's bold demand for a portion of the inheritance. It was clear that money brought out the worst in people. My mother and Tom were revealing their true nature, greedy and arrogant, just as I had always known. You gave up that right when you renounced the inheritance. There's no going back. I won't hand over the fruits of my father's hard work to those driven by greed. The uneducated fool won't stop whining. Stop your sniveling and hand it over now, Tom shouted. Despite their unreasonable demands, I called security to have them removed. They left quietly, escorted out of the property. In the days that followed, security footage revealed that they had been lurking around my house, trying to find a way to claim my father's inheritance. Their persistence was unsettling. I used the footage to report them to the police for suspicious activity, and after that, they disappeared from my life. After a while, I heard from a family friend about Tom and my mother's situation. Tom had found a new job, but his selfish behavior quickly earned him a bad reputation. Within a year, he had alienated his boss and was relegated to low-level desk work, far from the privileges he had once enjoyed as my father's company's president's son. Eventually, his poor reputation made it hard for him to secure another position. "Why aren't you working? Stop complaining," my mother would scold. "It's not like I'm just sitting around doing nothing," Tom would respond. "What kind of effort are you putting in? You lazy, unemployed fool," my mother criticized. After witnessing Tom's failure, her attitude shifted drastically. Once a staunch ally, she now blamed him for his inability to keep a job, becoming cold and distant. This change in my mother's behavior placed tremendous psychological pressure on Tom, and he withdrew into himself. Having lived off my father's wealth for so long, neither my mother nor Tom had developed the skills to make ends meet, and now they found themselves struggling. As for me, I am now happily married to the man I had been seeing, and we live in the grand home I built. My husband shares my passion for helping children, and together, we're working to fulfill that dream by establishing the necessary resources and gaining the required credentials. I remain deeply grateful for my father's wisdom, and with my husband by my side, I'm living a purposeful and fulfilling life. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video. Stay amazed.